that middle time. And this is a time when most people aren't really doing much. They're contracting instead of expanding, and they're kind of spending more time reflecting. So I want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me. And this is going to be a really good topic. We're going to be talking about, and this is going to be a two-way conversation. I want to hear from you guys as well about what to do when you're not feeling empowered and when you're not feeling free. We're going to go into that. And we're going to talk about two schools of thought, and those two schools of thought are things happen to me and things happen because of me. And I am going to explore that and a few paradoxes as well, because that's what I love to do. And the reason I'm going into this is because these past few months haven't really been the greatest in my entire life. And for that reason, I actually feel like I can speak to this. I can speak to this from being in the trenches, because I'm noticing that it's fashionable to talk about being vulnerable in the past tense, as in that was me before and here is me now. And sometimes to me, that doesn't sound completely honest. As a matter of fact, sometimes it comes across as being on a little bit of a high horse. We're all vulnerable and we all go through periods of life that are kind of sucky. So I want to talk about that. And also, before I do that, before I dive into this, a brief introduction about why I'm qualified to talk about freedom. Anybody is qualified to talk about freedom. I want to say that first. Any human being should be qualified to talk about freedom. Okay, so here goes with my short life resume. See if I can do this in a minute or less. High school, a non-event. College was wonderful. I hung out with an art music crowd, joined the Air Force, was in the Air Force for 2 years, lived on the central coast of California, moved to Denver, got involved with some really cool sports like rock climbing and downhill mountain biking and snowboarding, was also involved in a stage combat group and did things like fight choreography. So some of my resume looks like a stunt person's resume, but that's not the end of my life stunts there. I was divorced. Oh, I don't know how many years ago it was. It was a long time ago. And then I started grad school for acupuncture. And my next stunt was opening my own business, which I did. And at the time, I was doing things a little bit differently from how other people were doing it. And I'm not going to go deep into that, but I was starting to get into creating repeatable systems and digital products even back then. Fast forward, I decided in 2017 to sell everything I own. In other words, I packed everything into two check-in bags and one carry-on bag and one backpack and moved to Europe. One-way ticket to Amsterdam, now moving in Southeast Europe, learning Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian, and here I am. I also decided to make everything portable. I wanted to make my business portable. This was before it was even a thing, before virtual was a thing. And I decided that I really liked marketing. So here I am now. I'm a marketing nerd. I really love it. And I love mastering things. I love mastering things that are difficult, like learning a Slavic language or playing the drums. And those are kind of projects in the works. Okay, so that's my life resume. So that's where I want to go today. I want to talk about what it's like when you don't feel empowered. You're having a sucky month, or you're having a sucky 6 months or a year. What do you do? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with those two perspectives. The first one is things happen to me. And I see this a lot online. It's very, very common. And this tends to be your classic victim mentality. We've all seen this. It can happen on a personal level, on a group level, or even on a nationwide level, which I've seen. And it can be very damaging and result in even things like war. And I'm not going to mention any entities here, but that's the dark side. There is also a bright side to this. It's not necessarily about always being a victim. Sometimes it's about choosing to create a community and acknowledge that people need to help each other out every once in a while. So there's a lot of doublespeak out there in the same sentence or the same breath or the same paragraph. I've seen self-help people recommend that you not seek out help because other people are also dealing with their own problems. And at the same time, you need to seek out help. So that really puts you in a weird little position there. So that needs to be balanced, in my opinion. So the bright side is that asking for help and Creating a community and having a support system is important, but the dark side is that victim mentality. Okay, and then the other perspective is things happen because of me. And I can speak to this because this is true. I actually worked at a place in Denver, which was about a philosophy called Science of Mind, not Scientology, but Science of Mind as an Ernest Holmes. And I had the privilege of seeing a lot of big speakers like Marianne and Deepak and Wayne Dyer. Feel really lucky about that. So I am very familiar with the law of attraction, and I actually studied it. So the bright side of all of this is empowerment, obviously, but there is a dark side of this, and we have discussed this in those circles, and that is victim blaming, which does happen. I've also seen this. I've also seen this online. I've seen trolls do this, as a matter of fact. And even people that are well-meaning can kind of do this inadvertently. So I don't believe that we all have complete control and responsibility over everything that happens in our lives, including external circumstances. I think that's a little bit too much. I think it can actually be a trap, and I understand the psychology behind it. The psychology behind it is that if I do all the right things, those bad things won't happen to me. So we start blaming the victim. In other words, if someone can't afford to buy that house or they got robbed on the train, or an extreme example, she was wearing that dress, that is when we fall into that trap of victim blaming. And I also don't think that that is healthy. Now, here's my paradox. It's not either about one of those two things, things happen to me or things happen because of me. I want to say the other options are things happen with me because we're all creating our own reality together and we all affect each other. So I want to say all of the above. Things happen to me, things happen because of me, and things happen with me. All of those things are happening at once. So, okay, great. You're probably thinking that's a really great philosophy, but where does that put me? So I came up with about 9 or 10 tips or insights that might be helpful, that aren't the usual platitudes that you hear when you're actually not feeling empowered and you want that balance. You don't want to be on either end of the spectrum where you're feeling completely responsible for stuff that you're not responsible or in control of in any way, shape, or form, but also not taking any responsibility. Okay, so the first tip number one, this is really obvious, but I have to say it, is make sure that you take care of your mental health proactively. And this is where I am going to insert my disclaimer that if you are actually feeling in any way, shape, or form of, if you're thinking about harming yourself, definitely get help. You definitely want to do that before you even get to that point. Everything that I'm going to be talking about, or what I'm talking about here, isn't actual depression. So clinical depression, we're actually talking about being in a funk and having external circumstances kind of overwhelm you. But you do want to keep your brain healthy. You want to make sure you're taking care of your mental health. You want to make sure you're getting good nutrition, because if you're eating junk all the time, there's not much you're going to be able to do to get yourself out of that funk or actually take any action that's going to move you forward. So you want to make sure you do that and also develop good habits. Now, that's like the obvious. I want to get that out of the way because you've probably heard that before, but it's true. So number two is avoiding platitudes. And I want to speak to this because I see a lot of advice given by a lot of self-help gurus that are still about platitudes. I think this used to be worse a few years ago. It's kind of gotten better. But I think the problem is that, and I'm going to use the P word, privilege, that a lot of them are assuming that everyone has the same resources, that everyone has access to the same resources. And these resources could be support, it could be a local community, it could be credit, it could be a steady income, it could be health, it could be any of these things. And I just want to say, not everyone has access to all of these things. I know people with chronic illnesses that are dealing with that. I also know that there have been times when I didn't have a lot of these resources. I didn't have a local community, no stable income, no support system. So I had to work with what I had. And these things could even be small, like getting your hair done. I still can't find someone that can do my hair well. It's one of those things. So I just work with what I have. So everything that I'm going to be talking about is, it's not going to be assuming that you're working with resources that you might not have. Okay, so number three, this might sound obvious, but avoid numbing yourself out with numbing habits. And the reason for this is that we're going to miss a lot of things if we're in that numbing state all the time, and we're not going to be able to solve any problems. It's just going to make the problem worse. But tip number four is the opposite. I told you there was going to be some paradoxes here. So what does this mean? What does it mean, numbing yourself? I'm not talking about numbing yourself. I'm talking about an occasional escape from reality. Sometimes hyper reality, like a hyper focus on reality, can actually be as detrimental as escapism or numbing or fantasy. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is looping in your mind worst case scenarios. And I know that there are people that talk about controlling that, but that's also focusing on hyper reality. That's a lot of brain expenditure right there. So you're either going into the worst case scenario in your mind, or you're trying to solve problems in your mind. And sometimes you need to flip that off, or you're fighting against that tendency to go into problem solving mode on loop or in worst case scenario on loop. So what this is, and I've been in a situation, you guys let me know if you've experienced this. You actually need a break. Your brain needs a break because it's so fucking exhausting to be there all the time. You don't need to be constantly in battle. So sometimes you just need the book, a good book to read, a good movie to watch, or a friend to talk to, because that's actually good for your brain too. So that's tip number four, not fighting against yourself with that. Okay, tip number five is not bypassing emotions. And this is another one that's going to sound really obvious on the surface, but I see emotional bypass happening all the time. I know there's actual methodologies that talk about controlling your emotions and making them go away. In other words, your thought rules your emotions, and I actually think that's bullshit. I think that's a bypass. I think there's more sophisticated ways to get from point A to point B. And one of my favorite tools for that is a book called Power versus Force. And I think the author is David Hawkins. If I'm wrong, I'll post it in the comments. Yeah, I love that book because you can't just go from a low vibrational energy. And I think the lowest one is shame and guilt. You can't go from there to ultimate spiritual enlightenment. And I love the way that everything is quantified with a number. So, in other words, the worst vibrational level, the lowest would be shame and despair. And the highest would be, I think Jesus scored like the highest score that's available. And it's kind of a nice tool because it kind, you can kind of see where you're at. And you can't quickly upshift from despair to joy or even neutrality that quickly. So you have to jump to the next level before you can get to the next level. I like to use that tool. And I definitely don't like the bypass because I don't think it is very helpful. I think it's really important to go through those intermediary stages and experience them as well. And one of those intermediary stages that often gets a bad rap is anger. So when you're going through, if you are experiencing fear and anxiety, you have some time to kind of lift that up. But if you are already starting to descend more into panic and despair, it's going to be very difficult to think clearly. And there's going to be other things, obviously, that you're going to need to do. One of them could be getting professional help when you're getting to that point and it really sticks. But if you have flashes of it, I think that it really helps to kind of jump to anger. And this is where you are shaking your fist at the sky and saying, I can't fucking do this anymore. I can't take this anymore. Ugh. It helps, because what you're telling your body is that you're not going to take this anymore. You're not going to internalize it and you're not going to solidify it anymore. You're going to burn off that shit. And that's what anger is for. You might have heard this before, but I am a firm believer in going through that anger stage because there's I don't think there's any shortcuts. And you can tell me what you think about that in the comments. Okay, so I'm going to move along to tip number 6. And this one is not really popular with a lot of the circles that I run in, but I'm going to say it anyway. And this is about making objective decisions, big decisions, like in your business and big life decisions based on data rather than just your emotions. And I know a lot of people talk about checking in with their gut, and I totally get that. But the problem is that if you are in a state of fear and anxiety and even having flashes of panic or despair, your gut isn't going to give you the right information because in your body you might feel it. Just when we talk about despair and we talk about panic, it's a sinking feeling. And that is something that we want to acknowledge, but not necessarily listen to. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is because, and this is from personal experience, you might think that you're not doing very well, but you might be doing a lot better than you think you are. Let's say, for example, that you aren't sure how you're going to pay your bills and you're not getting any clients. On the surface, it could look like you're failing. But if you look at what's happening in your other systems, and this is why you need to track them and measure them. So, what I'm talking about here are things like traffic to your website and how many clicks you're getting on your website, followers to a certain extent, not so much. That's more of a vanity metric, but you get the idea. You want to look under the hood and see what other things are happening. I also like to keep track of my accomplishments. So I look at accomplishments, things that I've gotten done that year, and I keep a running list of this, and also testimonials and nice things that people say about me because it helps keep me on track and helps me to understand that I'm headed in the right direction. So when I'm talking about not letting your emotions or just your intuition take over, the danger is that it's not giving you the right information to work with. I have an equation I like to use. I might talk about this in another episode, and that is intuition plus data equals insight. And we want to make decisions using insight. And that's going to help keep you out of the zone of fear, anxiety, and despair in the first place. Okay, so that's number 6. Okay, number 7 is about making room for opportunities. And this is where you could get practical, but you could get super woo too. And I really love embracing all of it. So, what this means, if you're hyper focused, like previously I talked about hyper focus on reality and running that loop. When you do that, when you're running that loop through your head, either if you're focusing on worst case scenarios or how you're going to solve a problem to the point where you're dreaming about it or fighting against it, you're not going to be in a relaxed enough state to be able to receive information. You're not going to get that email that, you're going to decide to click on, or you're not going to have a conversation with that person. You're just not going to see things. It's kind of like being in fight or flight mode and you're driving a car and you're about to crash. You're focused only on that moment in time and only on what's right in front of you. So if someone were to ask you, what was that restaurant that you saw on the left-hand side or the exit number or what kind of trees were around, you're not going to remember because you were hyper-focused on not crashing. So that's one of the things I mean by making room for opportunities. It is really easy to think about being disciplined and getting stuff done. I know I do this. I need to do this. I need to do something now. I need to just do something. So we end up not prioritizing the right things, and that's a whole different thing there, but not seeing maybe what we need to see. And getting into the woo part of it is kind of interesting. This is where I kind of like feng shui and clearing your space and just clearing out some of the gunk energetically that might have accumulated. So this is one of the reasons why the other tips are also helpful. You have to let your brain rest in order to get here. Okay, so tip number 8 or insight number 8 is about surrender. And this is just about letting go of the steering wheel altogether. And because it's not getting you anywhere, there are external circumstances that you don't have control of because you're not the master of the universe, but there is somewhere a master of the universe, I believe. And that sometimes we need to just let them drive. So that's what I mean by surrender. And you can get to this place Likely, if you go through that anger stage, if you're really pissed off and you're shaking your fist at the gods and saying, I can't fucking take this anymore. And before you know it, you're on your knees and saying, I surrender, just help me, something help me. So, whatever that looks like for you, it could be loud, it could be very quiet, whatever that looks like for you. And this leads me into insight number 9. And you might have been wondering if I'm going to mention this, and I am. And this is faith. Faith, as in spirituality, and for some people, their religious faith can help them through obviously a situation like this. I am actually not going to get too deep into that because I don't have enough time to dive into that one. That is definitely a very personal experience, and I couldn't even begin to speak to it in 10 seconds. So I'm actually not going to do that, but it is on my list of insights. Okay, number 10, here's one you might not expect. Whatever you call a higher power, whether you call it a higher power or the universe or the quantum field or God, let's choose the word God, for example. Spelled backwards, it is dog. One of the things I think that has helped me through hard times is my dogs, because you just kind of absorb it. Their life is so simple. For them, everything is so simple. They just love you, you love them. They get so excited just by the prospect of going for a walk or getting food, or getting a hug from you, and their tails wag. And it's wonderful. It sounds really stupid, but it's actually dogs. Maybe for some people it's small children, but just exposing yourself to innocence, I think, is also a really good idea, because everything that I've talked about here, this is not about innocence or experiencing the world for the first time. This is all about kind of being world weary and experienced, and what to do when it really feels like it's starting to beat you down, and what it feels like when you don't feel empowered anymore, because that's definitely going to happen. Let's keep it. All right, so I am going to actually give you a bonus tip here, and this is about taking action. And with that, I'm going to segue into, I am actually hosting a webinar about planning for 2023, and it's called Clarity 2023. And this is geared toward service-based professionals that are looking at scaling their business. And I know for some people that goes in one ear and out the other. And what that means is that you are deciding to go from one-to-one services and maybe expand into one-to-many. And this could look like anything from a book to a course, a membership, or a program, or any way that you're serving more than one person at a time, or any way that you're creating something repeatable. And what I help service-based professionals do is figure out what the first step is, and then the next step, and then the next step. Because in your mind, you're thinking, okay, I want to create a course. Well, what do I do? Or I want to promote that course. How do I promote it? Or maybe you're at the stage where you're thinking, I know I need to build my email list. How the heck do I do that? So I help people through those stages. And what we're going to be doing in this free webinar, which is happening, I don't have a date set yet, but I'll be giving you the details in the comments. But it's going to be about planning based on the research that I've done about trends that are happening in 2023 for service-based industries. What's going on? Is this a good time to expand? And I'm going to say, yes, this is a great time to expand. I'm not just saying this, I'm actually expanding. So even if the market gets a little bit funky, this is traditionally when a lot of businesses gear up a little bit. They turn the volume up just a little bit. They don't turn it down, because usually the ones that turn it down and they contract, they end up regretting it and not riding out like these kind of rough patches when it comes to the economy. There's also some other trends that I'll be talking about, but most of all, I'm going to be helping you plan your next 90 days. So we'll be using some tools to help you figure out not just what your goals are. It's not going to be just straight ahead goal planning. There's going to be some other tools that we're going to use here to help you plan for the next 90 days. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I will have links in the comments. And I want to wrap this up with asking you what your thoughts are about this. I want to hear about your experiences if you're going through something like this, or if you are in a position where you're helping, mentoring, or coaching other people, how you help guide them through this process. So I'm going to wrap up, and with that, I want to wish you a wonderful new year, and I will see you in the next video.